Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I teach educated, successful couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships so that you can stop compromising and start feeling fully alive in your relationship. I'm Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor. I'm a physician, a relationship and intimacy coach, and I'm an intimate marriage expert. My husband and I have been married for 26 years. We have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing marriage. I've shown hundreds of couples how to do so as well. So if you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how. Now, let's dive in. I'm really excited about something. So, my signature program, the Aligned and Hot Marriage Program, is available online for couples to go through at the pace that they desire, with the depth that they desire, really having a lot of control and privacy in the process. However, I've had hundreds of couples go through that program, and many of you have requested a live coaching component to be able to have my attention and expertise help you actually implement what I teach in the program in a customized way that's really personalized to you and your relationship. Well, I have heard you, and I am creating something that will make that available. I'm not ready to give you any of the details, but I am telling you that it's coming along in the next few weeks. And in addition, it has me thinking about all of the things involved in implementing the 6 keys to an intimate marriage, namely cultivate curiosity, embrace honesty, be kind, choose happiness, take responsibility, and seek growth. All phrases very easy to say, seemingly easy to understand, but fairly sophisticated and intricate when it comes to the implementation and integration and embodied application in your living, breathing, pulsing relationship. So I've been thinking about what is involved in supporting you to achieve alignment and heat. After all, my program is called the Aligned and Hot Marriage Program, and I definitely emphasize alignment with good reason. In fact, I'm going to do another podcast explaining this in more detail. But today, we're going to focus more explicitly and directly on what it takes to turn up the heat. And if you have young children around or whatever, when I say explicitly, what I really mean is directly. This is not going to be an X-rated show by any means. But I am going to focus more directly on what it takes to have a truly long-lasting, happy marriage with a nourishing, erotic, intimate life. The place I'm going to start is by saying that many couples, whether it's the first time they're making love, or you've been married for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, however long it's been, the reality is that the vast majority of couples are far more comfortable having sex than talking about it. And this is such a shame. It's understandable. It actually has a lot to do with shame and taboo and feeling unworthy of desire and compromise, not wanting to cause any discomfort in your partner, not wanting to take the risk. Like, I'm so sympathetic to why this might be the case. And honestly, that used to be me. I remember very distinctly the first time a man and I were lying in bed, I think mostly unclothed and clearly about to be completely unclothed. And he said to me, "Alexandra, what do you like?" This was someone who, at the time, well, I was in my early 20s. He was much older than me, a very experienced, attentive lover. It was our first time together, and he wanted to know what I would enjoy, what would bring me pleasure. And so he did the mature thing, and he asked me. But even though my body was ready to do mature things, and my mind was up for it too, I was not ready to answer that question. It was too uncomfortable. So I just leaned up and started kissing him and engaged our lips so thoroughly that speaking was no longer what was going to happen. Because honestly, I both didn't really know what I wanted, but more so, I didn't have the words. And I can't say if I had the words, if I would have been comfortable saying it, but I'm guessing not so much. And in this regard, I'm not unusual. I know that, as I say, the vast majority of couples are much more comfortable just having sex rather than a conversation about it. But that specifically restricts how good the sex can be. There's very interesting research which reveals that this is research that the Gottmans did, interviewing many, many couples with all kinds of different relationships. And the bottom line is that the most important part of cultivating a healthy sex life is talking about a healthy sex life. That's what they concluded. I probably myself wouldn't say it's the most important part, because what comes first is the desire. The most important part is the desire to have a healthy sex life and the willingness to lean in, be uncomfortable, do what it takes, do whatever you need to feel how you feel, both emotionally and sensually, in order to have a healthy sex life. But when it comes to measurable actions, then yes, one of the very most important parts of cultivating a healthy sex life is talking with your partner about sex and the sex you're having. In fact, only 9% of couples who can't comfortably talk about sex with one another say that they are sexually satisfied. I'm going to read that again. Only 9% of couples who can't comfortably talk about sex with one another say that they're sexually satisfied. What does that mean? It means that if you're not talking with your partner about sex in an honest, vulnerable way that sometimes feels uncomfortable and awkward, sometimes you just start laughing, but a conversation where you're learning things about your partner and you're expressing things so they can learn about you. If you're not having those kinds of conversations, it is statistically likely that you are not satisfied, gratified, happy, and engaged with the sex that you are having. So this is the context for me to invite you to consider having that first conversation with your partner about sex, or If you've had conversations before and they were uncomfortable so you avoid it, make a point of doing it more frequently and get comfortable with it, because like anything else in life, when you do it more often, it becomes more comfortable if it's something you actually want to learn how to do. So for the rest of this episode, I'm going to give you some clear tips on exactly how to get the conversation going so that you can get it going on without words necessarily. Meaning, have these conversations so that you can deepen, expand, and enjoy more pleasure with one another. So the first thing when it comes to having conversations about sex, unless you're already both super comfortable, then by all means, what I'm about to say doesn't need to apply. But if you're not super comfortable with yourself, with your partner, and you haven't yet had lots of informative conversations which reveal truth that you wouldn't have known if you weren't speaking, in that scenario, then I highly, highly recommend that you separate the conversation from the act. In other words, don't start talking about sex when you're about to have sex, while you're having sex, or just after you've had sex. It will feel like a criticism, and it will definitely dial down the erotic energy. So instead, in a more neutral context, when you're both fully clothed, when neither one of you is stressed or, well, I don't say you have to get rid of stress completely, but what I really mean is like neither one of you is in the middle of a work project or on your phone doing something. Like you want to say something like, I'd like to have a conversation with you. Are you available? You want to both be present. You don't need to both be gazing into one another's eyes, not at all. In fact, it may be that if you're a woman listening and you're married to a man, it may be that your man is more comfortable having that conversation with both of you not facing one another, but instead, side by side looking forward, like you're sitting on a park bench looking at the landscape, or you're both in the front seat of the car, one of you driving, looking forward. Often men are more open to discussing intimate topics when you're positioned that way, whereas women are glad to have more intimate conversations facing one another. Now, if you're listening and you're a woman and you'd rather face forward, great. I'm just telling you what the research shows, and if your man would prefer to be having eye contact or facing one another, there are always exceptions to any of these generalizations. And I want you to be exactly the kind of woman you are. I want you to be exactly the kind of man you are. But if you're having difficulty having this kind of a conversation and you haven't tried this, then I recommend you try it. I'm very familiar with this research in terms of optimal ways for conversations with men and optimal ways for conversations with women. And I have 4 children. My daughter is the oldest, and then I have 3 sons. And definitely once my youngest is 10, but the other 2 were tweens and then teens. One is in his 20s already, but once they were into their teens, once puberty hit, I implemented this technique because if I want to have a conversation and they're not so open, there's a greater chance they will be if they're facing forward. So I'm familiar with the research, and I have also found it to work in application. So try that if that resonates for you. Anyway, the point is, set things up to have the conversation when it's neutral and it's not a very sexy moment. That's the way to start. The next thing is to set it up for success. So again, if this is the first time you're having a conversation about sex, I recommend you actually start by acknowledging other parts of your relationship which you enjoy, which are going well. Maybe you say something like, I really love how we both have a super strong work ethic and are accomplishing a lot of our professional and financial goals, and I love how we support one another in that. Or I love how we parent together. Whatever it is. And I know that there are parts of your relationship you really love, or talking about sex is not going to be the top priority. But if you want to have better sex, then let go of any resentments that may be clouding your mind and consider aspects of your relationship that you adore. I love how our home is peaceful. Or I love how there's so much dynamic energy in our home. But just talk about what you really enjoy in the relationship and then say, and I'd really love to up-level our intimate life so it is on a par with how motivated and gratified we are professionally, or whatever it is. You want to make the connection and set the scene. This is a way to make it, just set it up for a win-win, because if you just start talking about sex, it can be awkward, and it is quite likely that your partner will just be bracing for criticism. But if you introduce it in the way that I'm talking about, that's just way less likely. And then, once you've talked about an area in your marriage that you really enjoy, or more than one, and how you would like to up-level and get your intimate life on a similar high standing, then name something that happens sexually that you enjoy. I love the way you indicate you want to have sex. I love the way you breathe on the back of my neck. I love how you always make sure I'm satisfied before you are. I love the way it feels when our skin touches one another. Or if you can't think of something, then think of how much you enjoy when you have your arms around one another watching TV. It does not need to be super sexy, but if it is, by all means say so. And if it's not, then share what you enjoy, because whatever is happening in your relationship, that is the place to start, to acknowledge something good. And if this really is the first time that the two of you are having a conversation about sex that you're having or not having, then maybe that's enough. To just do it at a neutral time, to acknowledge some other area in your relationship which is wonderful, and say you want the sex to be just as good and evolve similarly. That could be enough. Or maybe it's enough to then say what you enjoy. And maybe then you ask your partner what he or she enjoys. And that's it. And then the next time you have the conversation, again, it's in a neutral setting. You ask if it's a good time. You can mention something that you like again. And then say that there are a few things that you'd like to try or experience differently. And ask your partner if he or she is open to hearing it. It's very important to ask so that your partner has an opportunity to opt in and it doesn't feel like it's just dumped on them. Your partner's going to be more present and more responsive if they actually opt into having that conversation. And when you do say what you'd like to experience or what you'd like to be different, really prioritize not blaming and not putting your partner down, but instead sharing what interests you, what your desire is, because that makes it easier for your partner to give it to you. If you start talking about what they're doing that's wrong, then they lose confidence. They become more hesitant. It adds extra distractions to creating pleasure with one another. So what does this look like in particular? Let's say your partner touches you and it just feels a little rough and you'd like it to be softer and slower. Of course, it could definitely be the opposite. I'm just picking this as a random example. So rather than saying it's too rough, it's too fast, it really is too much for me, you can say, it tends to be faster, but I'd really love an opportunity to experience slower and softer. When you do that, I just really love it so much. Or, I'm not sure, but I think I'm going to be a lot more responsive when it's softer and slower. Would you be up for trying that the next time? Okay, you don't need to sound like me, but do you hear how gently I'm speaking? How I'm not telling him he did it wrong. I'm not even focusing that much on that. I'm talking about what I'd like to move towards. And then you see how it goes. In fact, I recommend maybe after the first time, or maybe after a few times, you even say, how is it for you to be having these conversations? You can have a conversation about having a conversation about sex. And what I really mean to emphasize is this is a playful, risky exploration that needs to feel somewhat collaborative. This is not at all a report card. This is taking the exploration that is part of a beautiful sex life and exploring ways of touching one another and bringing that into the verbal realm where you're exploring how you're going to have the sex conversation dance, which actually really makes me think, a lot of times in society, people speak about having the conversation or the sex conversation, meaning teaching a child about sex. And anytime I'm in a conversation or interviewed on this topic, you can be sure that one of the main points that I make is that it is not the conversation. It's the conversations. You want to go as far as you can go in the first conversation and make it a priority for it to be a success. This honestly is whether you're talking to your child about sex or you're talking with your partner about sex. Two very different conversations, of course, but the principle applies.
If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, and please leave a rating and a review. And if you're ready to deepen your relationship and create a truly intimate, delicious, and vibrant marriage, head over to the Work With Me page at alexandrastockwell.com and choose the program that's right for you.